You're crouched in a shallow cave in what's now South Africa, roughly 70,000 years ago. Smoke curls up from a small fire, and someone tosses a handful of dried leaves onto the coals. The smoke changes, it gets sweeter, heavier, and the people around the fire lean in and breathe deep. That's not an accident, that's on purpose. And look, before you picture this as some solemn ancient ritual, understand that these people almost certainly also had a friend who took it way too far and had to be walked outside. Some things about group behavior around a fire have not changed in 70,000 years. Here's exactly what this video is about. When humans first started deliberately inhaling smoke from burning plants, and why that habit is so much older, stranger, and more universal than a pack of cigarettes. This is not a video about the tobacco industry. This is not a video about vaping, and this is definitely not a video about whether smoking is bad for you. Yes, obviously. Thank you. We've all seen the warning label. Because here's the thing nobody really tells you. Tobacco is a rounding error in this story. Humans were setting fire to plants and breathing the results for tens of thousands of years before anyone in the Americas ever rolled a tobacco leaf. And the reasons had almost nothing to do with getting a nicotine buzz. Let's start with the evidence itself, because it's weirder than you'd think. At sites like Border Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have found bedding made of grass layered with ash, and mixed into that ash are the remains of plants known to repel insects when burned, some of which have mild psychoactive properties. That's roughly 70 to 80,000 years old. So what does that actually mean? It means people weren't just tolerating smoke as an unfortunate side effect of fire. They were choosing specific plants for specific effects and building their sleeping arrangements around it. Here's a modern comparison that actually lands. This is basically the Paleolithic version of buying a citronella candle that also happens to give you a slight buzz. 2 birds, 1 plant. That's not superstition, that's applied chemistry with 0 periodic table. But here's the question that should be nagging at you. How do you even figure out a plant does that? You'd have to burn a lot of things, breathe a lot of smoke, and pay very close attention to what happened afterward. Which brings us to a genuinely wild idea some researchers have floated. And I want to be clear, this is speculation, not settled fact. A few anthropologists have proposed that deliberate plant smoke inhalation may have been one of humanity's earliest forms of self-medication, a trial-and-error pharmacy conducted one campfire at a time. We don't know that for certain, nobody left a lab notebook, but the pattern, specific plants, repeated use, consistent effects, is hard to explain any other way. Now, here's where it gets heavier for a second. If early humans were using smoke to manage pain, anxiety, or the sheer physical misery of Ice Age life, that reframes something we usually treat as a modern problem. We like to talk about substance use like it's a symptom of contemporary stress, too much work, too much screen time, too much everything. But the archaeological record suggests humans have been reaching for a mind-altering exhale since before we had permanent homes, before agriculture, before writing. This wasn't a coping mechanism invented by modern civilization. It might be one of the oldest coping mechanisms we have. Sit with that for a second. Now, separate from the medicinal angle, there's the ceremonial one. Residue analysis from sites in the Andes, thousands of years later, but still long before written history, shows tobacco and other psychoactive plants being burned in what look like ritual contexts, sometimes inside enclosed spaces, almost like an ancient smoking room, small chamber, concentrated smoke, and, researchers suspect, a deliberate communal high. That's not a bad habit, that's a technology. So if the why is medicine and ritual, what about the what? Because tobacco, the plant most of us associate with smoking, is a relative latecomer to this story. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests tobacco use took hold in the Americas somewhere around 8,000 years ago, maybe earlier. Compare that to the 70,000-year mark we started with, and tobacco is basically a new intern showing up to a company that's been running since the last ice age. But here's a detail that tends to surprise people. Early tobacco use wasn't really about smoking a cigarette-style object at all. Some of the earliest confirmed evidence, from a rock shelter in Utah around 12,300 years old, comes from charred tobacco seeds found near a hearth, suggesting people were burning or chewing the raw plant long before anyone thought to roll it into anything resembling what we'd recognize today. Which raises an obvious question. If it's not a cigarette, what were people actually doing with it? The honest answer is a lot of different things, depending on where and when. Chewing, brewing, burning as incense, blowing smoke onto wounds as a treatment. The common thread wasn't the method, it was the intent. Get the plant's compounds into your body, one way or another. Smoke was just the most efficient delivery system available. That's not one invention, that's dozens of cultures independently arriving at the same idea. Here's a modern parallel that might sting a little. Humans didn't discover smoking and then figure out 50 uses for it. They had 50 different needs: pain relief, insect control, ritual, focus, and smoke kept turning out to be the answer to all of them. It's less like inventing a product and more like discovering that duct tape fixes everything. So what does the actual chemistry look like from the human side? When you burn plant matter, you're not just releasing whatever compound the plant naturally makes. You're creating new ones through combustion, some of which barely exist in the living plant at all. Nicotine, for instance, becomes more readily absorbed through the lungs once it's been vaporized by fire than it would be if you just chewed the raw leaf. Early humans, without a single word of organic chemistry, had stumbled onto a more efficient delivery mechanism purely through trial and error. That's not folk medicine, that's pharmacology, discovered by accident, refined by repetition. And that repetition is really the whole story here, not one genius moment, but tens of thousands of humans independently arriving at the same conclusion. Set the plant on fire, breathe deep, see what happens. Go back to that cave in South Africa. Someone's just tossed a handful of dried leaves onto the coals, and the people around that fire lean in and breathe deep. They don't know what a cannabinoid is. They don't know what nicotine does to a receptor in the brain. All they know is that this smoke from this plant makes something feel different. And that's enough to do it again tomorrow night. Now think about what you do without thinking twice. Maybe it's a coffee before you can function like a human being. Maybe it's stepping outside for a cigarette when things get stressful, or lighting incense to make a room feel calmer, or reaching for a painkiller the second your head starts pounding. Every single one of those is the same basic move that started around that fire 70,000 years ago. Take a substance, alter how your body feels, repeat because it works. Because here's the whole story compressed. Humans were choosing specific plants for their smoke long before tobacco ever entered the picture, using that smoke as medicine and ritual and pest control all at once. And only much later did one particular plant in one particular part of the world get turned into the specific habit we now call smoking. The method came first. The plant we associate with it was almost an afterthought. So the next time someone frames smoking, vaping, or reaching for a substance as some uniquely modern failure of willpower, a symptom of stress that didn't exist for our ancestors, remember the cave, remember the ash, the bedding, the leaves tossed onto the coals on purpose by people who had never seen a warning label and never needed one to know exactly what they were doing. We didn't invent this, we inherited it. That's present to this day.